You're Free to Go is sponsored by Milburn Men's Clothing, where top athletes shop for sharp, tailored style. And whether Mark and I are in the studio or the courtroom, Milburn dresses us for success. Mention YFTG and get 10% off at Milburn Men's Clothing, which has been providing the finest in men's clothing and suits since 1946. Call 651-645-2922 or visit www.milburn.com. Hey everybody, it's Guy Fronstin here today with Mark Nurik, your favorite hosts of your Free to Go podcast. Thanks for tuning in today with us again. You know, it's November, the beginning of November 2025. We dropped our 13th episode on Friday, and Mark, this thing is really growing. You know, we've had over 134,000 people view just one of our posts. Like, we are really, really growing, and it's super exciting.
It's really amazing, and of course, you and I individually, we're getting people calling us all the time, talking about it, saying, when are you going to do some more? Well, we're going to continue doing this.
Right. It's random. Like, I just bump into random people who, you know, realize that I'm doing this podcast. Like, oh, I've heard your podcast. So it's really kind of exciting. And we want to keep bringing it to everybody, of course. So what we need to remind them, and I'm going to take the moment to do that now, is please make sure when you look at the podcast and listen to it or watch it, whichever way you're listening to us, make sure you like it, comment, and also subscribe. Some people think it costs money to subscribe, Mark.
No,
but
it doesn't.
We don't charge anybody to watch
this.
this.
Streaming service.
Right. We charge our sponsors, of course, but that way we can bring this for free to everybody. Right. So please, you know, if you want to keep watching us from week to week or listening to us to week, like, comment, and subscribe. Again, it's totally free to subscribe.
We'd love to hear your comments.
Yeah, please bring us more comments.
Yes.
In fact, today, one of the cases I'm going to talk about is as the result of some comments that I got. Someone said to me, you know, do you guys ever work on like a cold case or an unsolved case, you know? And we've both had situations where people have come to us. You and I are working on a big one right now. There was a theft in the exotic car industry, probably 3 years ago. The feds started looking at it, and no charges have been filed to this day.
Right. A lot of these cases take a long time to unwind and develop.
Right. So unsolved. And sometimes we do such a great job, you know, dodging and weaving and so forth during the investigative stage that our client never gets charged.
Sure.
You know, which is obviously a great accomplishment.
Like I said, some of the best things I've ever done, I can't talk about because these are people, you know, who are celebrities or famous people or just people who do not want their names known in the public arena about what they may have been accused of. So we kill the case before it gets charged, which is always the best opportunity, and nobody's the wiser, but we can't talk about it, can't brag about it.
No, we cannot. And one of my civil attorney friends who, remember, civil's all about, you know, money, criminal's about freedom. My civil attorney friend says, but when the guy gets charged, you must, in your mind, you must say cha-ching, cha-ching. And the truth is, we would make a lot more money if our clients got charged.
If the case went to trial, that's when you make the most amount of money. Yeah. But if you can kill it right away, you've done your client a service, you feel great about it, and that's what your job is.
Right.
To try to kill it, or if you can't kill it, provide for a soft landing. The example I always give is, it's instead of jumping out of a plane without a parachute, we give you sometimes, if we can't win the case or we can't make it go away, we try to give you a mini parachute. So when you land, you don't kill yourself, you may break an arm or so.
Right. Which is probably a better choice than getting indicted and sent to prison for the rest of your life.
Right.
Yeah, so no, I think it's a good analogy. I'm going to start using that, but I will give you credit when it comes up.
One of the things the criminal lawyers, actually all lawyers do, especially in trial and court, is we're like comics. We steal from each other.
True. Yeah, we do.
I don't think anything I've ever said in any cute little story or anything I ever do in the courtroom is something that I thought of myself.
Right. Yeah, but we give credit to each other when we've but you know, it's you mentioned something just now that I wanted to also kind of go a little deeper for our listeners. You mentioned about sometimes these investigations go on for a while, and I want listeners to understand that there's often a distinction between state investigations and federal. My experience, and you can correct me if you've had a different experience, is that state moves relatively quickly. They make the arrest, and then they tend to do their investigation, as opposed to federal, where they will take years within the statute of limitations to investigate investigate. And the day they finally charge someone, they could go to trial the next day.
Yeah, their case is ready, but more importantly, their case is pretty rock solid.
Right.
Because they've spent all that time investigating it. And in those rare instances where they decide, we just don't have enough, or we're, successful in talking them out of it, then there is no case. But otherwise, by the time there's an indictment, they generally have a pretty strong case. I mean, the federal conviction rate is very, very high.
Right. And, I think it's better to do it that way but as opposed to the state, because a lot of times at the state level, they jump to a quick conclusion that someone committed a crime. They make that arrest. They destroy their life, not only in the media because they see the arrest and so forth, but then the prosecution of the case. And often, we will get our clients exonerated, but it's kind of too late because it's already been out there in the media that they were arrested, and people remember that. And the media often doesn't cover a year or two later when you get charges dropped.
Yeah, and the rush to judgment can be devastating. I may have even talked about this, but early on in my career, I had a case where some guy was identified about a year after the robbery by the robbery victim at some location that they were both at, and the police came and they immediately arrested him. They didn't even bother to look at the original arrest report, which had a description which this guy couldn't possibly match unless he grew 4 or 5 inches and lost 50 pounds.
Right, yeah.
But there was that rush to judgment. No, that wouldn't happen in a normal case.
Correct. Yep. And that's part of our job, obviously, is to check all of those variables and make sure that the police are doing their job properly.
So I'm really excited to hear about your case, about your cold case.
Well, it really ties into everything we're saying because this is a gentleman whose life was completely destroyed by the media, completely destroyed by law enforcement during this investigative stage. And yet, literally 18 and a half years later, there's no evidence of him being connected or tied to a murder whatsoever. And 18 and a half years later, he still suffers pain and anguish and literally PTSD from what the government put him through. So, we call these cold cases. Technically, a cold case isn't really still an open investigation. This case was a unsolved murder from March of 2007. It's, believe it or not, still and always will be technically an open investigation.
Because they didn't find the person who actually did it.
Right. And the sheriff, from day one, or within a couple days of the murder, there was so much fear in the community that he made a statement that we will solve this crime. We will never close this investigation until the day it's solved and so forth. So he's still the elected sheriff. So Rick Bradshaw, who's a great sheriff, he made a commitment to the community to keep this investigation open. As I explain the facts, you'll understand why. So again, it's a cold case, but yet an open investigation, unsolved murder from March of 2007, and it involves our town where I live, Boca Raton. So it's a local case for me. And for those of you who don't know, Boca Raton is a small, very quiet, but very upbeat town, very affluent. It's on the water, the east coast of Florida, in between Palm Beach and just north of Fort Lauderdale. There's a lot going on here. It's a really, really popular town. In fact, you'll hear lately, the last few years, I hear it mentioned in a movie or on a TV show. So it's really become kind of a prestigious area. So back in March of 2007, my client's wife was at the Town Center Mall, which is a very high upscale mall, one of the best. Yeah, you've been there, I'm sure. And while she was leaving after shopping, she got abducted. The evidence shows that she was then driven. She got abducted in the parking lot. There were cameras that showed her exiting the mall, walking to her car, and then you kind of lose. It's outside the range of the camera. She gets in her car, though, and then they follow her through other investigative means. They determine she was driven by the assailant north a couple miles to a bank. They went through the drive-through, the teller of the bank, or the money machine, I guess you call it. And
ATM.
ATM, exactly. And they had her take out the maximum amount of money from that account. That bank was just a few hundred feet in front of a elementary school. In fact, my daughter was at that elementary school at the time. It's called Murakami Park Elementary. And the gunman, the assailant, shot and killed this woman.
Oh my God.
A really wonderful, actually had known her. She was a great mother of a son and a daughter. She was a wife. She was a great daughter to her mother, who I know well, and to her brother. She was a great sister. She was very, very well liked in the community. She had a group of women that she walked with every day, a few miles for exercise. They're really one of the nicest, most well-liked women around. And after she pulled the money out of the ATM, the guy shot her, threw her down to the ground, opened the door, threw her out of the car, and then he took off. The shooting and so forth obviously immediately drew attention. Cops were on scene. The reason I mentioned it was in front of the school, this elementary school, is that my daughter was there, got shut down. All they knew was there was gunshots heard. And, that was 18 and a half years ago. But we know in today's day, it's a very scary thing at schools. Sure. So that was way back then. The school was shut down for several hours. The gunman then drove the car about 2 miles north, drove behind a Office Depot and abandoned the car there and took off. You would think lots of cameras, they would be able to tell who this guy is. Unfortunately, when he pulled into Office Depot, there was a camera directly at the windshield, which would have got him. But the camera had a lot of smudge on the lens. I don't know what smudge or dust, dirt, whatever you want to call it. The lens was dirty. That's the bottom line. So you couldn't see. You could see an image, but not a face. Okay. All you could see was a dark, like an outline of a person. But you couldn't tell whether they had blonde hair or black hair, red hair. You couldn't tell anything. It drove around to the back of the Home Depot where they had cameras. And you think, okay, well, here's more cameras. The guy's going to hop out of the car. They'll at least get him there. But what they found was those cameras were working in opposite order, meaning during the daylight, they were on black and white, and during nighttime, they were switching to color, or vice versa. Anyway, they were completely reversed. So during the daytime, when they should have been in one sense, black and white or color, I forget which it was, they were in the wrong mode, and therefore that also didn't capture it because it was very bright out, and it just couldn't capture the person there. So they had, unfortunately, with all these cameras, there was opportunities to really get this guy or woman, but later you'll understand they believe it's a man. So but they didn't, unfortunately. He takes off. So, we know that statistically, we know that law enforcement always look at the spouse, right? Statistically, most often it's the spouse. So the problem with this investigation, in my opinion, is that the law enforcement zoned in immediately and focused in and drilled down immediately on the spouse.
Was there some indication of marital problems?
Well, it's a great question. Yes and no. The wife had filed for divorce about a year or so earlier, but never pursued it.
So there was a divorce pending?
There was a divorce filed for, and then it was kind of just, it stayed. The husband never responded, and they continued to go about their marriage. They were living together. So the answer is really no. They were still happily married, traveling. Never really got to the bottom of why that divorce was ever filed and kind of withdrawn, basically. But, from all communication that I had when I was working the case, they had a nice marriage and they had a family. Like I said earlier, with they were grown kids at the time, or like the college age, So he was immediately a suspect just because statistically that's the case. We were able to prove very quickly that the husband, my client, was about 30 miles away in person at an appointment. They confirmed it. They verified everything.
So he could have been the person in the vehicle.
He was not the trigger man, as they say, so he wasn't the person in the vehicle that kidnapped his wife from the mall. So he was clearly not that person. The theory became that he hired someone to kill his wife. At the same time, the police did look at his son as a possible suspect, which I'll get into. But the point I want to make is that, unfortunately, because law enforcement was so focused on the husband they really didn't take the opportunity to look at other potential suspects, right? And we all know it's not just television or movies. The truth is, the first 24 to 48 hours are crucial in these investigations, before people have the ability to really cover their tracks and so forth. But they were so focused on just trying to nail the husband. And that was really a shame, because I believe to this day it's still an unsolved murder, that had they really opened their eyes and done a macro approach to their investigation as opposed to a micro approach or narrowed approach, that they probably would have found the person.
But did you ever find out any reason why they focused immediately and pursued the husband?
Yes, I did. Number one, statistically, but number two, they talked to a lot of people. This was the full force of the law was on this investigation. Again, I can't emphasize enough what a big deal it was for this. I don't want to call it a quiet, sleepy town, because Boca Raton is not. Right. But as far as crime,
right,
it really is a quiet, sleepy town. So this was unheard of. So it was full court press on this case. They talked to so many people, like within the first couple days, 100+ people that were in the circle of friends of this couple, my client and his wife. And a lot of information they got was that my client was a tough guy. And I don't mean in the sense of being an organized crime tough guy or a Sopranos tough guy. I mean that his personality, the feedback they got that they were sharing with me, the investigators, when I would say, why are you all over my guy when you should go, the real guy's out there somewhere, go get him. They said, well, this guy says he plays a lot of basketball and he gets in fights on the basketball court. This guy says he plays a lot of tennis and he's just rough on, on the tennis court. I'm like, well, just because someone's a great athlete and they're very competitive and they fight on the court doesn't mean they're murdering their wife. Like, that's a huge leap.
Michael Jordan would always be
exactly
under investigation, the most competitive guy in sport.
Yeah, exactly. And I'll tell you, my client is a very good athlete and he is very competitive, but he did not kill his wife. And that certainly was no reason for them. But they kept saying, everyone says he's not a nice guy. He's a tough guy. He gets angry and he can yell. And so that's really why they were so focused on him. And then they started to look at the son. The son was in college, and he was struggling a little with some addiction issues. I'll get into that in a second. But what really took this investigation to a whole nother level was about 3 months after this murder. There's another shopping center in Boca Raton called Meisner Park.
Sure.
There was a woman who was going to her car with her child, and someone approached her, and she threw her keys and ran. And the police didn't know about this. So what happened is the mall where the murder of my client's wife is in the Palm Beach Sheriff's Office jurisdiction. This other location, Meisner Park, is in the jurisdiction of Boca Police Department. At the time, the two weren't really talking with each other just because they have their own agencies. It wasn't anything intentional or on purpose. They have their job, and they didn't, they just don't talk to each other about these different investigations. There's a million investigations going on at a time. They don't share it with, hey, this is what we're working on. What are you working on? That's not how it goes. But then 3 months later, approximately in December of 2007, there's another murder exactly like my client's murder. As she left the mall, this wonderful lady, Nancy Bacchicchio, with her 7-year-old daughter, Joey Bacchicchio Hauser, they get abducted leaving the mall.
Same mall?
Same mall, the Town Center Mall in the Palm Beach Sheriff's Office, jurisdiction. They get driven to a bank to get some money out. But in this case, they return the car to the mall, and both the mother and daughter get murdered in the car and left at the mall.
Oh, my God.
That's when this case really became a huge, huge case, not only locally, but it made a lot of national news. Dateline, 2020, all these shows were doing reports on it. There was a real move to try to solve these murders. And when that happened, when that second one happened, there was Palm Beach Sheriff's Office, they realized, hey, let's talk to Boca Police and see if their department has had any similar MOs, And that's when they discovered the woman that happened in between. You're right, at Meisner Park. And so then they formed a joint task force to try to work together.
Well, let me ask you this. At that point, did they then take your client off the suspect list?
No.
Wives?
No, what they said was, we still believe, and to this day, I see the head prosecutor to this day, she says, we're going to get your client one of these days. The other two incidents were a copycat. They're convinced it was
the problem with being innocent is if they truly believe, if the government or the police truly believe your client's guilty, the fact that you're innocent doesn't mean anything.
It doesn't.
The fact that you're not involved, that all the evidence points away, sometimes they say, well, that's just your client making up stuff.
Right. Yeah, that's their mindset.
He's acting innocent when he's really guilty.
Right. Yeah.
It's crazy.
And it's hard to get them to overcome or open their mind up to other possibilities. So they wouldn't on this, and to this day, they still think the others were a copycat. Now, the good news is the woman at the Meisner Park in the garage, she is alive, and she survived this, thank God for her, and was able to give she gave a description. The biggest part of the description actually is the guy was wearing a floppy hat. And she was able to give a facial description to some extent, which the artist's renderings were publicized and, went all over the place. And so there was some talk that description was seen at the mall a few months later, at the town center mall, when Nancy Bakikio and her daughter were kidnapped and killed.
And that description was different than your client?
Well, yeah, it wasn't my client, number one. Number two, we know my client was 30 minutes away or so at an in-person appointment. So it really became a very, very big case here. And but getting back to now my investigation, the police investigation of my client, he's a Jewish doctor, actually. My client's a Jewish doctor. His wife was Jewish. Kids are Jewish. And in the Jewish religion, they do what's called a shiva, where after someone is buried, they invite people back to their home. A wake. That's comparable to a wake.
Right. The whole idea is food and community to try to ease the grief and the suffering.
Right. Yep. And to be there to support the family going through this. Right. Well, the night of the funeral, they had this at their home, called a shiva or wake. And because I mentioned how popular she is, there were 200 plus people at this. They're and the rabbi comes, does a very short service, like 10 minutes or so. And there's, just people trying to be supportive of the family. About 15 minutes, 30 minutes into this, with a huge crowd in this house, the police come busting down the door and say, everyone out of the house. We're here with our search warrant, and we're searching this house. And people had come in, they'd put their pocketbooks down on a bed in one of the guest rooms. They'd put their car keys on a table, like by this. They had put their things down, and they're like, oh, I got to get my pocketbook. Nope. No. And they threw everybody out of the house within seconds. They evacuated that entire house. It was really, really, I understand, like we both have been prosecutors. We understand that police, prosecutors, they're worried about evidence disappearing and so forth. They want a crime scene. If this is at all was a crime scene, they want it to be, the integrity of that scene to be maintained. There are definitely legitimate reasons. But at the same time, it was very upsetting to everyone there and in the community, the way the police handled this very, brutal, approach to get the heck out of this house immediately. You can't even get your car key type of thing. So it was very, very upsetting to everybody. But here's what they wanted. When they found the car behind the Home Depot, they found those, what are they? They're scented dryer sheets, right? They found those in the car. And they weren't quite sure what they were being used for.
Oh, the things you throw in when you throw your clothes in to dry them?
Yes, they make them smell nice.
Right.
So the law enforcement told me, it was the first time I learned it, apparently now I know, if someone's, back then, remember, marijuana wasn't legal. There wasn't a medicinal marijuana prescription back then, 18 and a half years ago. So, I learned that people who smoke marijuana will often use those sheets to disguise the smell. So if the cop pulls you over for speeding, they don't smell it. They say they also sometimes use it to wipe down fingerprints and things of that sort. So they were going to the house to see if they could find the same set of these scented dryer sheets and match it up to the ones that were in the car. They were also going there looking for jewelry, or actually more specifically missing jewelry. So the reason for the missing jewelry is so interesting. I mentioned a few minutes ago that the son had been a suspect. Now he quickly got ruled out. Like they, within quickly would be like a second. Unfortunately for the son, he wasn't quickly ruled out. It took them several months, but he was ultimately completely exonerated. But what happened was, he was in college. He was struggling a little bit, or like a lot of college kids, having a good time, partying a little bit. And he had a girlfriend who partied a little bit too, or a female friend. I'm not quite sure if they were what the real relationship was. But that young woman's mother had passed away, and there was an allegation by the police that when that young girl's mother passed away, that the young girl had sold or pawned her mother's jewelry to support a drug habit. Now, I have no idea if that's true or not, because that was not my case. Wasn't involved in it at all. But that's what when the police are doing everything, and I'm challenging them, this is why. We're looking for jewelry. We want to see if this was something that the son, and this girl came up with this idea.
Can I stop you for a second?
Of course, that's what we're here for.
Just boggles my mind. I understand that the police are looking for the dryer sheets, and the police are looking to see if the son pawned the mother's jewelry. How the heck did they get a judge to sign a search warrant? You need probable cause. Right. Yeah. We're supposed to be safe from unwarranted government intrusion into our homes and our persons by the Fourth Amendment, which means in order to get a search warrant, you've got to show probable cause to a magistrate, to a judge.
Yes.
Which means you've got to articulate specific information. If I was a judge and police came to me and said, well, we found dryer sheets, let's see if they have the same dryer sheets. Or the girlfriend of the boy, she sold her mother's jewelry when the mother died. Let's see if he sold the mother's jewelry now. That's nonsense. I say, hey, come on.
Right.
Get out of here.
Of course.
Get me some evidence, something that rises to the level of probable cause. So I'm curious, how the hell did they get a search warrant?
Okay, the only thing, and I challenge them, great minds think alike. I like to think that's they said that they have GPS, and I'm going to back up for a second. When you go from the mall where she was abducted to the bank where she was shot and thrown out of the car, along that path, just about 100 yards off of that path is their home. And they said the GPS showed, because remember, she's in her car, so they had their GPS, and the car was abandoned. They had the GPS, or a black box actually, showed that the car had diverted by her house for a quick second and then went to the bank. So it went from the mall, by her house, and to the bank, which again really was only, I'm talking a few hundred yards off of the path.
Yeah, but how does that make sense?
So they think
if someone abducts you,
right, maybe they were taking her to her house to get her jewelry, to get money, to get whatever. It made no sense to me, but that was their basis. They said to the judge in the application for the warrant that we think part of this abduction and murder occurred at the house. So that's how they got it. Well, at the end of the day, it fell flat. They
found nothing.
Yeah, there was no evidence of that.
Dryer sheets?
Yeah, they did find dryer sheets.
Find them in my house too.
Exactly, every house has them. So
we use too many of them. I got to talk to my wife.
Yeah,
about that.
you do. The investigation got off to a bad start with that. Of course, the family's already traumatized. Now they do this to them. It was all in the media. So then they start getting all these weird phone calls from psychics saying, this. I think it was this person did it, that person did it, and all these different theories. And they just never got anywhere except to look at my client and the son. So they start looking at the son. Was any jewelry missing that he may have, with this girl that he was friends with, thought about, hey, we'll get some of mom's jewelry when she's dead and we'll pawn it and we'll support a drug habit or partying or whatever. There was no proof of that whatsoever. But as a little side note, what's so interesting is that when that investigation happened, they obviously uncovered jewelry that the girl had sold of her dead mother's, right? There was one ring still remaining that hadn't been sold off by the pawn shop. And the father of this girl, whose wife had died also, she died, I believe, of illness, though, not a murder. he asked the police to return it to him. And they said, no, we're not going to return it until this case is over.
Until your case.
Right, until...
Makes no sense.
Makes no sense. They're like, well, for now... Well, at the time it did, because what if the son was the murderer and the girl maybe was, co-conspirator? It might have been...
Yeah, but it was a completely different death, a completely different house, completely
course.
different jewelry.
Right. And you know what? That's exactly what the father was saying, and the husband of the woman who died, whose wife was at the pawn shop, and they refused to return it. And so one day I get in the mail a letter from the Florida Bar Association saying that an ethics bar complaint has been filed against me for being in cahoots with law enforcement not to return the ring to the father.
Oh my God!
Right.
No good deed goes untold.
Right. So I'm like, wait, and I call the Florida Bar. I'm like, I'm like, wait a minute. I'm a private attorney trying to make a living here. Do you realize what you just did to me? Like, do you not realize that I'm a defense lawyer and we're never in cahoots with the police? Like, we're on the opposite team. How could I be in cahoots with police to hold this person's ring? Like, it makes no sense. And now you've put me in a position where I have to respond to a bar complaint? Like, that makes no sense. And like, oh, I'm just doing my job. It was ridiculous.
It a bar attorney?
Yeah, it was an attorney working for the bar.
Well, don't get me started.
Right. So at the end of the day, of course, that bar complaint went nowhere. Eventually, the family did get the ring back, which I was very happy for. So here's what goes next. Like, there really is no evidence that my client or his son was involved in this. And by the way, of course, there were fingerprints in the car of my client and his son, but that was understandable because it was a family car.
Sure.
So that meant nothing, right? So police get creative. They like to use pressure and so forth. So what they tried to do in this case was create some arrests on different reasons for my client and for his son. They kind of get arrested at the same time, and they think maybe they'll be on the phone and they'll get them on a recorded line saying, yeah, Dad, I can't believe you did this, or
You mean
something.
they arrested them?
Yeah.
For
So
what?
they arrest the son for filing a false prescription for some pain pills. Right. They arrest him. They lock him in the jail. They put this pressure on him. They go and visit him. Say, hey, come on, just come clean that your father. Your dad murdered your mom. Like, come help us out here, buddy, and we'll help you out. And he obviously his dad didn't do it, so he said, no, I have no knowledge of that whatsoever. I don't believe it to be true, and so on and so on. At the end of the day, the case was so made up against him that not only did all charges get dropped, but the prosecutor herself went and filed a petition to expunge the arrest for the son of my client, right?
Well, how did your client get arrested for what?
No, wait, but I got to say that my client, when with the false prescription case, when the prosecutor expunged it, what that really means for our listeners is that you can legally answer no under oath when asked, have you ever been arrested or charged with a crime? There are exceptions to that rule. It's very, very powerful, the power of an expungement. And it just showed how wrong the prosecutor was, that they never volunteered to expunge someone's case. So my client, his case was even more bogus. So my client I mentioned earlier is a doctor. They arrest him in a different county where his office, Boca is in South Palm Beach County. If we drive from this studio, Podcast Junkies, shout out to Ben. If we drive from Ben's studio about a mile south, we're in Broward County.
Right.
So my client, the doctor, his practice was in Broward County. They arrest him for insurance fraud. And what they say is that he has a patient that he was billing his health insurance for treatment, and this patient is a pilot. And on the days that his insurance was being billed for treatment, they can prove that he was actually flying for his airline and not even in the state of Florida at the time. So it has to be insurance fraud because the patient wasn't even in the state of Florida. Well, I go to take the statement of the deposition of this patient, and I say, I'll just make this up because, again, it was 18 plus years ago. So on January 15th, I see that you were treated and your insurance was billed. What was your schedule that day? He said, well, January 15th, he has his calendar. He knew to bring it with him because that was part of my subpoena. He said, yeah, I arrived back home in Broward County at about 3:30 p.m. I said, well, did you see the doctor that day? He said, I did. I said, how did you see him? He said, well, I happen to be his neighbor. So because of my routine, I very often would go to his house and get treatment at his home. He has a setup, he has the table, he has all the equipment at his home. I said, okay, so did you do that on that day? He said, I'm looking at my calendar, and I 100% went to his house and was treated that same day. Okay, and there were like 4 or 5 dates. All 4 or 5 dates were exactly the same. I came back to town that day. I went one time, it was actually at the office, and every other time it was in his home, swearing under oath, 100% got the treatment there at his house. So that was the deposition. So right before the trial, the prosecutor wasn't dropping it, but the day of jury selection, actually, I'm in the courthouse. I get pulled aside by a colleague prosecutor who I'd known for many years, tremendous respect for one another. We had never socialized outside the office. We were just professional colleagues and, like I said, respected each other. He pulls me aside, literally like off to the side, and he says, I need to give you a heads up. I know you're about to pick a jury today on the doctor's case. He said, so-and-so from Palm Beach County called and said, we need to make this arrest. This is months ago when your client got arrested. We need to put pressure on him. We need to get him in that jail and try to break him down. And we know this is a bogus case, but we have no other choice. We're running out of strategies here. We know we killed his wife, and we just got to get him to break. And so we're going to go forward with this case. And Broward kind of came into cahoots with it, and that's how this whole case. So I go into the prosecutor. The jury literally is going to be in any minute, and I tell him what I just heard from one of their prosecutors off the record, but that if I have to subpoena him, he'll come in. And 10 minutes later, the case was being dropped.
So let me ask you a question. I mean, it's always easy to talk after the fact, but did your client or did you consider suing?
Yeah,
the police?
We did.
Because that clearly was a case of false arrest and malicious prosecution.
Right. Yeah.
The fact that I assume they hadn't even asked the pilot if he was in fact treated that day.
Right. And it's a shame because I get people come up to me a lot and say, hey, I just got subpoenaed on like a civil case. And I know nothing about it. Like, why is this lawyer even subpoenaing me? And a lot of times prosecutors, defense attorneys were guilty of it. You and I aren't. We always do our homework. But there are lawyers out there who just do things without even doing their homework. No one had spoken to this guy. Somehow I guess they had at some point, but I don't know to what extent. Maybe they didn't ask the right questions. But somehow they got to the fact that he was a patient that was billed and he wasn't there. But or he was working. So I don't know how that actually unfolded, but my client was so, upset and angry, and he just wanted this out of his life. He was in the news almost every day. They were making up horrible stories about him, and it was really bad that, gambling issues and prostitute issues and all sorts of stuff, just like really beating him up day after day after day. And he just wanted to move on with his life and get away from all of it. So,
yeah, of course, the flip side to filing a lawsuit, even if he was successful, keeps it even more in the news. And it's very, people don't understand how emotionally taxing litigation can be.
My God, this guy would come in my office and cry and on the phone and just devastated. The whole family was devastated by this. And all they wanted was their mother back, obviously, and the wife back, but they wanted to solve the murder. So it was really, really horrific for all of them. To this day, they haven't found anybody. They really haven't pursued it. But I think that what's not funny, but interesting is about once every 3 years, I'll get a call from the lead detective on the case, and they'll say, have your client standing by because the guy with the floppy hat, remember I mentioned him? We think he's in town. We think, and they believe he's the guy that my client either hired or he was a copycat. They don't know. But we think he's in town. We're on our way to go find him right now. They'll be, for example, say, we just heard he landed in Miami airport. We're on our way, and have your client standing by. What they're saying to me is, because we're going to be arresting him within hours because we know this guy's going to flip on your client, right? And then a couple hours later, they call and say, oh, we missed him. We thought he left the airport and went to this address. He wasn't there. So every couple of years, 3 years or 4 years, I get that kind of call. So at least, like I said earlier, even though it's a cold, old case, it's still an active investigation.
And they still think your client did it. And so far, I haven't heard. I've been a prosecutor. I've been doing this for 50 years now as a lawyer in criminal cases, both prosecuting and defending. so far, I haven't heard anything that you've said that would suggest to me, if I was the prosecutor, why the focus is really on him.
No.
The fact that he was Michael Jordan on the basketball court,
Yep.
or that he was John McEnroe
McEnroe?
on the
Perfect.
tennis court.
Yeah.
Big deal.
I know. They were just very stuck on it. And again, to this day, 18 and a half years later, there was zero evidence to support that he did this. And, he tries to move on with his life every day. It's been very, very hard for him.
Is he still here in this?
Yeah, he spends a lot of time at a home in Colorado that he owns, because it's hard for him in this community.
Wow.
But this case went on for a very, very long time, and I think it'll come up in future episodes when we'll talk about other cases. I'll probably
let's find out if they find the guy with the floppy hat.
I know. Hopefully
and when
they will.
Fingers somebody else. The question is, how big is the apology going to be to your client?
Correct. Yes, that's right. In the meantime, we're going to hear about your case, but first we do.
Well, I don't know if we've got enough time left. I think we've used most of our time. Your case is fascinating.
It was good. I could go on for another hour, but let's hear from our sponsor first, and then we'll decide what we're going to do. You're Free to Go is sponsored by Lang Realty, South Florida's premier residential real estate broker. Whether you're buying, selling, or renting a home or condo, Lang's experienced realtors are standing by ready to help you. Contact one of Lang's top realtors today at 561-703-2427.
While we were on our break, something else occurred to me. Twice now you're saying something happened at the mall.
Yes.
Now, I know from past experience, sometimes filing cases, civil cases, for lack of security or negligent supervision. I'm just wondering, was there ever lawsuits against the mall?
Yes, actually there were. My client and his family, meaning his two children, they did file a lawsuit for negligent security. You're much more of a civil litigator. I really stay away from that. You do major criminal and you do civil. I stay away from civil unless it has a tie to a criminal case, It's like a DUI manslaughter and there's a civil claim there. Stay involved. So there was a civil claim here. I stayed a little bit involved. I don't remember exactly who the defendants or respondents were in that case. I know the mall was one for sure. And there was a substantial civil settlement against the mall. The Bakikio, the event that occurred, and her daughter, 7-year-old daughter. It was interesting. There was a lawyer who the family hired, and he put out it was kind of sad. He put out an email to all these lawyers and a listserv of lawyers saying, "Hey, just landed this big case. I've never done one before of a wrongful death, security negligence. Can anyone help me?" Right? And I'm like, oh boy, this was not a good thing to do. Anyway, basically a response came back really quickly saying, "I understand that she wasn't married and she has no other children, no parents, and under the Florida wrongful death claim,
there's no actual plaintiff.
Right, you have no claim. It can only be in this wrongful death claim to the children or maybe their parents as well. But there are no parents, and the child died with the mother. So they said, sorry to tell you this, but there was never a claim for the Bakikio family.
What's interesting is, though, because that was subsequent, that would have been an even stronger claim.
Yes, it would have.
Because you got prior notice.
That's right. Yeah, and had to beef up the security after the first incident.
Did they?
Right. Yeah, that's a good question. I know eventually they did, but I don't know if they had by the time the Bakikios, which were about 6 months after murder in March occurred. So it went on. It went on for quite a while, and like I said, it's really destroyed their life. I know that we don't have much time for you, so we'll save yours for the case you're going to talk about for next time.
And really, when I think about it, it's a double tragedy. It's the tragedy of the wife, the woman getting killed, and then the tragedy of the father still, the husband, that is, still being under investigation these many years later. And the police using tactics, because I guarantee you, I mean, I could be wrong, but it sounds to me from the way you've explained their behavior up until now that there was no guy coming in on a plane with the floppy hat.
Right.
I mean, how many people wear a floppy
Right.
hat? What is it, 10,000,
Right.
10 million?
Yeah.
I mean, it was just to get the client nervous so he could do something.
Correct.
They think the same way they arrested the son, so there would be this phone call that they would surveil.
Right.
I mean, it's kind of like...
They went to, they spared no, like, their creativity, their theatrics. I'm talking about law enforcement. They just went as far as they could. In fact,
that's not a very sophisticated
No, that's
tactic.
true, too. 3 years after the incident, my client has a girlfriend, and they're still watching him. I guess this was the reason they did what I'm going to tell you is probably to let him know that we're still watching every move you make. They call me, law enforcement, says, "Guy, he did it. We think he did it again." I said, "What are you talking about? We think he murdered his girlfriend now." And I said, what are you talking about? They said, "Well, we watch him, and we haven't seen her for 3 days. So we think he must have murdered her, and you might want to have a little talk with your client." I'm like, okay, I call my client. In hindsight, I realized they just wanted me to tell my client they were watching every step you make, which we already knew they were. He's like, "Are you kidding? She's in California visiting her family. Like, what are you talking about?" So that's why she's been away for 3 days. But, he got the message loud and clear that he couldn't make a move in this community and without the law, or really anywhere. They know when he books a plane ticket. And so, so it was
an interesting case. Case.
And throughout the case, the police would send me information or a question about this, a question about that, show me a photograph. So as we do, we were responding to a lot of things and able to dodge and weave our way because, it's easier when your client's not guilty, obviously. But had we just... we have the choice, on the defense. We can either just completely remain quiet and silent and do nothing and let them try to build and prove their case. But in your case, when you have an innocent or not guilty client, a client who had nothing to do with what they're accused of doing, you're more inclined to actually respond to their things so that you can show them that, no, that's not correct. And so throughout it was really the first 5, 6, 7, 8 years, they were very frequently, the law enforcement was very frequently reaching out to me with, "Well, how do you explain this picture?" Or "We heard he did this or that," or, so I was very much able to respond and hopefully each time satisfy them that, no, you're going down the wrong lane here. But they still have never closed the case.
Well, the one thing you can't control on the defense side is the opinion of law enforcement or prosecutors about your client's guilt.
Yeah.
You can't control it. If they want to, like you said, the prosecutor still believes that your client is guilty, was behind the murder. Mm-hmm. You can't control that.
Right.
All you can control is defending your client by, thank God, having the burden of proof on the government. And that means simply, no matter what they believe, if they don't have the evidence, they can't charge.
Right. Yeah. And hopefully the system plays out that way. Right. That's the way it should.
It should.
Yeah. So hopefully for them, maybe like you said earlier, it'll get solved one day. And then we'll address it. And I guess
this was fascinating.
You're good.
So I guess until our next episode,
you're free to go. Down Low Investigations is a sponsor of You're Free to Go. Behind every great criminal defense attorney is a great private investigator. That's why Mark and I use Down Low to investigate cases all over the country. Down Low can help you too, whether you're running a background check on an employee or running a background check on a blind date, or let's say you need someone followed or some other type of investigative work conducted. Down Low is the way to go. Call Download Investigations at 561-843-1806. Everything expressed and discussed in this episode are the opinions and experiences of attorney Guy Fronstin and Mark Nurik and their guests. All ethical rules are complied with. Attorney-client privilege and confidential information is not shared or released during these episodes, and names, dates, locations, and other identifying information may be changed to protect confidentiality. Topics are embellished, and none of the statements made constitute legal advice and should not be considered or relied on as such.